My name is Andrew Mitchell, and I'm the chairman of the Scientific Exploration Society, which is working together with the Frontline Club to bring you a series of debates, which we call Exploration at the Frontline. And the idea of these is to bring together explorers and scientists, academics, and journalists who work at the front line of some of the biggest issues of today. Tonight we'll be having one of those debates. It's about you as well to engage, ask questions, and you'll hear from all of these speakers around a particular topic, water wars, and whether, and asking the question of to what extent water is driving conflict that we see today that leads to migration. Now, just a few words on the Scientific Exploration Society. We are a long-term expeditionary society that's been around in the United Kingdom for many, many decades and have organized many expeditions all over the world. As a result, we have a crop of explorers who've worked with us over those decades, who've been to literally the far ends of the earth and have seen a lot of these things at first hand. The Frontline Club, of course, is the home for war correspondents in London, and we have a wonderful collaboration with them that's been running for a number of years now to bring together this rather eclectic group of people. Now, water is really important. We couldn't be having a more topical topic than we've got today. Even as I speak, we've got governments in Malta trying to figure out how to deal with the vast migrations coming into Europe, which is a really new phenomenon, a new 20th century phenomenon. We've had lots of articles in the press. Haig was talking about it today in the Telegraph when he said what we are seeing today is really just the gust of an advancing hurricane. And why? Because of a number of things. Overpopulation, growing population. You may not call it overpopulation, but certainly growing population. And most of the population growth in the next 35 years will be in Africa. It's absolutely vast. And when you get increasing population, you get a lot of pressure on land. A lot of what I do is work on tropical forests and tropical landscapes and look at that is where a lot of our food is going to have to come from in the future. A well-wooded landscape is a watered landscape. So when you erode forests through overgrazing and cattle, you then reduce the capacity of that population to survive. Just recently I was trekking into the source of the Amazon River right up in the high Andes, 5,000 meters, 6 volcanoes around that valley where the Amazon has its source in Peru. All of them have lost their snow in the last 2 decades. Across the other side of the world, I was in central Borneo last year and on the river just near Pangkalaraya in central Kalimantan. It was about 5 meters lower than it should have been at the end of the dry season. We're seeing this water phenomenon right across the world. But tonight, what we want to do is debate to what extent that is coming together as a nexus, which is driving conflict and driving migration. So I'm going to hand you over to someone who is going to orchestrate this debate, and no one better than John Vidal, the environmental editor of The Guardian, who knows more about all of these issues than probably most of us in the room, having written so eloquently about it for so many years. So John, with that, I'm going to hand this over to you for what I hope will be a really exciting evening's debate. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. You're too kind. All I do is I talk to people like Tony and James and whoever, and they tell me what to do, and I just write it down. I am the sort of the Mercury. I am the, what you call it, I am the messenger of the gods. And but it's it's brilliant to be here tonight. As we were saying, these are great times for people interested in water and migration and conflict, because there's plenty of it around. Without more ado, Tony Allen, Professor Tony Allen, unless you know him, he is the sort of the god of water. He is the hydrologist of hydrologists. He's the man who people like James have studied all their lives, and he invented the idea of virtual water, the idea that water could be embedded in agricultural produce, and therefore people didn't have to have water. All they had to do was be able to get it to their countries. And Middle East man, top man, absolutely brilliant. we could talk to him for days and days and days, and we still wouldn't be able to get enough. So thank you very much for coming, Tony. He just won the Stockholm Water Prize, which is really absolutely the Nobel. James on my left is where he works for the other lot. I think he used to work for the Independent, and I can say that.
The other lot.
And, but he quickly got out, and he now writes books, which is much more interesting. He's a lonely man, with his studies, but they're jolly good. And he specialises in, for a waterman, obviously in very dry places. And I'm deeply jealous because he just spent 2 months in Yemen. Writing about the lack of water there and how Sana'a, the first capital in the world, perhaps to have to move because of lack of water. So I'm dying to hear some of his stories from there. We've got a genuine all-purpose explorer with us, and Michael Strandberg is Swedish, but he's not limited by his own personal geography. He travels absolutely everywhere. So minimum of 20,000 kilometers as far as I can see. He travels by camel, by mule, by horse, by... How did you get here tonight? It was I think by... probably by... Well, certainly by bus or mule. Anyway, he's here, and he's actually travelled through very, very many great, extraordinary places and can tell us what people actually say on the ground. And then finally, we got Roger Blench, who is a development expert, Cambridge ODI, northern Nigeria, a man who can talk a lot about the origins of Boko Haram and what's been happening up in the northeast of Nigeria, and whether or not there is at a root cause of the militancy up there, whether water is at it. Anyway, welcome all four of you. I'm going to basically hand over to you. Each of you talk for a couple of minutes or whatever you want, and then we'll throw the questions out because there's huge amounts to talk to. Obviously, the Middle East and North Africa is highly politicized. I mean, there's endless debates we could have about Israel, Iran, Iraq, Syria, so on and so forth. The question is there water at the root of these problems? And the answer is probably no, but let's find out. In which case, I can go home early because I've got to get to Wales. Okay, where do we start?
These poor standing people up to the empty seats. Well,
there's 3 seats at the front here.
Comfortable seats at the front.
Yeah. 3 seats at the front. If anyone wants to chair here, they can. James, as a fellow journo, as a fellow sort of scribbler, would you like to set off? I mean, you've got eminent experience of fantastically dry and dangerous places. What is the connection between water and flight or migration or evacuation or people leaving? Is this a reality, or is it just something dreamed up by the Independent and the Guardian?
It's probably both. Thanks. Yes, it is a reality. The more I look at these places, the more my journalistic career has been spent mostly in Afghanistan, then Somalia, and then latterly Yemen. All of these places have tremendous water challenges, and it was in Somalia where I started thinking that water really was at the root of these things. The turning point in the war against Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda franchise in Somalia, was about water. There was a drought in 2011, and the Islamists tried to deny the drought. Their response to it was to say that it was all Western propaganda, and that people fleeing the drought should not be allowed to do so, and they should go home and pray for rain, condemning tens of thousands of people to death. Didn't let the aid agencies in, and that was absolutely the turning point of the whole campaign against Al-Shabaab, which is obviously not over. And so water is at the root of all of this. I mean, Afghanistan, we think about the Taliban constantly and Islamism and so on, but actually what was going on in Helmand in southern Afghanistan was a water war. This was about 20 years of drought in that region, the amount of irrigable land reducing drastically, and the crop that makes the most money is poppies. And so tribes there were fighting over the reducing land, and the Taliban were exploiting all sides. Another water war. They're all water wars. 2 out of the 5 Arab Spring revolutions began with protests against about water, Yemen and Syria. People often forget.
Tell us what's going on in Yemen. And we read about Sana having to move out. You actually managed to get in there for 2 months. Very few journalists have ever got in there. You were specifically looking at water. What did you find? Is it a reality that water is going to bring that country down?
Yeah, I mean, the World Bank are the authority on this, and they've done studies that suggest that Sana, population of 2.5 million at least, may be unsustainable as a city within the next 4 or 5 years because water is running out. It's running out because the city has expanded so much, so it's population growth. 1910, there was a population of perhaps 10,000 people in Sana, now 2.5 million, and it's 2,000 metres up in the mountains. So they are all drilling for water. They're using groundwater to sustain the city in the entire basin. And there isn't enough. It's going down like a bath. It's going down by 10 metres a year in some places.
And how far can it go down?
They're already down to over 1,000 metres in most places.
So how many years would you give them?
Well, the World Bank gives them about 4.
4 years, there we go.
And if they're right, and that date keeps getting pushed back because they keep finding other sources of water, but if it does happen, and it will happen eventually, it's on track to become the first world city to fail through lack of water. That's a population of 2.5 million. And you think the immigration problem now is is an issue? You ain't seen nothing yet.
Interesting. Tony, can I come straight to you? Because, I mean, you probably fundamentally disagree with a lot of the stuff which has been written about water, especially in the Middle East. You would say that it's not. Would you put it at the root cause of the problems there, or is it high on the list of problems, or is it?
Intuitively, people think that if you run out of water, you go to war. But in fact, all you do is import some more food. 92% of the water that we need is embedded. 92% is embedded in our food. Only 8% is at home and in our job. And we can reuse most of that water. Clearly, poor countries can't. So you've been talking about countries living in extreme poverty in the case of Somalia. Yemen is a different sort of economy, but it is right at the top. When I give a talk about Middle Eastern water of the world, I say Yemen is the extreme. And when you say the city will run out of water, well, it's going to run out of this 8% of water. So it really is in a serious state because there is competing irrigation going on nearby. But you're putting it across as if it couldn't be solved. If there was stability and economic development, in fact, they could survive. The extreme example, and people will say, well, you're not talking about a poor country, you're talking about a very rich country. Singapore only has 5% of the water. It's only got, therefore, half the 8%. It's not in trouble over water. It's not going to war with Malaysia over water. It's not going to... So, the determinism which you're suggesting just doesn't hold. It does in circumstances of extreme poverty, but you can, in fact... so when I say the answer to water security or the answer to water insecurity is investing in human resources. If you can't get the human resources to be organized and having jobs and making exports, you can't get at the food. All of you don't realize that 60% of the UK food is imported. You happily go on not knowing or caring that you have been for 200 years. Certainly it started 200 years ago, got worse. We did push it back to 40% in 1990, but we're now back at 60%. So we're not in such a bad position as Yemen. But please do get the idea that it's food that is the issue. If you have disruption, then people can't get food, and there could be the case in the extreme case of the 2.5 million or 2.5 million people in Yemen, that they will in fact run out of the 8%. But
surely, I mean, the point being made is that Yemen is a very extreme case. And what we're talking about war is you're talking about armed conflict. Well, maybe there's a lot of variation below that, which is...
The armed conflict in Yemen is to do with the politics with Saudi Arabia and a whole lot of other things.
Surely the point is that the water stress adds
oh, yeah, it adds, yes, but it's not even the trigger.
It's not a trigger, right. OK, fair enough. And Roger, from, I think there's a sort of right and left split, I think we're going to see here. But, so northern Nigeria, northeastern Nigeria, Boko Haram, you would say this is just yet another conflict which has been going on for centuries and centuries and centuries of water, again, is nowhere near the source of any of the conflict which we're seeing. Is that right? Or do I misrepresent
yes,
it?
look, I'm going to show some PowerPoint slides, just a few, to summarise the point, if we may. Can we turn down the lights a little bit? It'd be easier to see. Great, okay, first slide. Oops. First slide. Right, so I've heard a lot about this recently, limiting climate change, rise of terrorism in West Central Africa, and so on. John Kerry was at COP the other day saying, you know, water, desertification, it's a threat to all of us. In my view, the connection between the two is a matter for science, not a matter for vague chit-chat. First, is there actually any evidence for climate change in the Sahel? Secondly, is there actually any evidence that terrorism, in inverted commas, is on the rise, and that recent events are anything unusual? I would say the answer to both these questions is no. If you allow policy to be made by people who don't read the science, i.e. development professionals usually don't read the science, then you get half-baked ideas driven by politics. Next slide, please. So how do we go about detecting climate change? Well, climate change is a long-term phenomenon. It's not something that happened last year. You know, people are fond of looking at a drought and saying, oh my God, climate change, you know. How do we actually do it? Well, we've got records for a century in West Africa. But for a long perspective, we've got to use palynology. We've got to use a study of fossil pollen. It's derived from cores which we take in lakes and other regions where sediments are preserved. They tell us how the vegetation has changed over millennia. And as it happens, I was at a conference just last week updating myself on the situation in West Africa. Vegetation is a good proxy for climate change. It tells us that the Sahel has always been subject to droughts, some far more severe than any recorded in the present centuries. I mean, in previous centuries, the entire of Lake Chad dried up. There was no Lake Chad. Okay, people get desperate, but of course they evolve coping strategies. Historically, there is actually probably a connection between slaving and these climatic variations. In other words, when people were vulnerable, they were more easily slaved. So it's rather the reverse of the migration hypothesis in a perverse way. Next slide, please.
How many slides have we got, just out of interest?
5.
Right, okay, no, fair enough.
I understand this is going to be a short thing. Don't worry.
You're so provocative. We want to get on to the debate.
It's okay, well, come on, there's a real basic 3-point argument here.
5-point argument, I'd say.
It doesn't mean, importantly, that the environment isn't degrading. There's ample evidence for water shortage, reduction in agricultural land. This is entirely the consequence of demographic change, the massive expansion of human population. Nigeria has gone from 5 million before 1900 to 150 million today. Cities need water, urban populations are quite ruthless in denying to rural areas. Expanding agriculture chews up ever more land, and so on and so on. Next slide, please. Are there any terrorists? No, there aren't. Terrorists are simply people who haven't won yet. Israelis were terrorists until Israel was created, then they weren't terrorists. Terrorists are people who do stuff which is currently taboo to middle-class people who have selective amnesia about their past. If you actually want to understand what is happening in West Central Africa, you've got to do the historical sociology. And what you discover, of course, is that you have wave after wave after wave of fundamentalist political Islam, at least since the last 200 years. Since I've been working in Nigeria, we've had at least 3 waves of this type of fundamentalist political Islam. And Boko Haram has got a lot more public publicity, and it's got a lot more weapons and money. And that comes from Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb is funded through drug sales, and the biggest market is undoubtedly the City of London. So it's a bit tough, but unfortunately, since the cocaine market isn't about to disappear, neither will Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, etc. Last slide. So what should we do? Well, the first thing is there's no connection between land degradation, water shortages, rural poverty, and revolutionary movements in the Sahel.
Good.
If the truth be told, debates about the policy response are a waste of time. since the people who make policy usually have degrees in political science and don't read real science. That hilariously useless response of the middle-class bureaucrats in the face of overwhelming migration, and the supposition, which I heard just yesterday, that more scholarships for West Africans will somehow staunch the flow of economic migrants, is almost too ludicrous for comment. If we were to have science-based policy, then probably the priority would be trying to halt land degradation and slow down urban water mismanagement, and simultaneously make the cities more livable, so there would be less incentive to leave. And there you go.
There you go. Right, bravo. Excellent. So that's fantastic demolition of the status quo, which the consensus of science and the consent. Anyway, no, it's tremendous. I actually agree with an awful lot you say. I feel a column coming on, as they say. But no, tremendous. And certainly, you know, discuss. I don't know where to start with my disagreements with you, but but maybe we'll come on to that. I'm in the chair. I know nothing at all. Okay, so we'll leave that, and we'll go to a real, genuine explorer who actually knows what he's seen, at least, and even if it isn't the science. And so, I mean, Michael, you've travelled vast distances through great areas. What do you see in your travels in terms of water? I mean, are you more on the left here, or are you more on the right? Are you more of a man for the conflict, or are you more?
I have 4,000 slides.
But you don't get to show any of them.
No, seriously. Well, basically, I've spent a lot of time in Yemen. Again, I've spent a lot of time between 2009 and 2013 on camel. And I've done a film about it, and basically I was looking for Al-Qaeda, which is basically to be found once again in American and English newspapers, not a lot at other places. I spent a lot of time, and during these trips, water obviously is part of what you need as an explorer as well. And I've come across a lot of people in deserts. I spent a lot of time in Al-Mahara, which is famous due to Wilfred Thesiger. And a lot of people are migrating further north to Saudi Arabia, not only due to water, that's a small part, but because they have no other opportunities. So what I do, I observe and I talk to people, and pretty much. So, you know, everything I've heard here is, I would say I agree with pretty much everyone.
Oh, well, that was brilliant. Okay.
More or less.
So, one man who believes...
I don't.
disagrees with everyone. Okay, well, look, let's chuck it out. Let's ask questions, because I think that's what the whole thing's about, really. A lot of you have got your own ideas, your own thing. Between us, this panel here can demolish any idea which you've got. So, so ask, be personal, be full of invective. One at the back before we've even started asking the question, and the one here. Okay, let's just ask questions and see if you can direct them at individual people, even better. Let's challenge them. Let's ask them what they actually do know. One here. If it's relevant, say who you are. If you're irrelevant.
Irrelevant. I come here largely for controlled rows, and it seems to me that there is a row here that needs to be brought to the boil, on your right and on your left.
It's not political in that sense.
No. So I want to hear the response to the demolition of your proposal, please.
What?
Which?
So who would you like to respond to who?
You were saying that actually it's all about water. All the problems are about water. But on your right, it's not about water.
Okay, James, you're the man. You're the man.
Right,
I'll come in. I'll back you up on this one.
I think what this is about is it's true that states do not go to war over water because if you invade another country for their water, there's a problem with water. You can't take it back with you. Because it's a resource that's over there. So that means you have to permanently occupy the place, which brings its own problems, and migration comes back the other way. So states tend not to fight over. So what it's about is there such a thing as a water war? Does it really exist? But I think what Professor Allen would agree is that there is conflict, right? Conflict is driven.
Conflict, yeah. But every editor crosses out conflict and puts war.
It's almost a semantic argument about the difference in conflict.
It sells newspapers.
Conflict and war. People tend to talk about water wars rather lazily. But I would certainly contend that water shortage is a prime driver of a lot of the conflict which leads on to war. So I would say that Syria, what's going on now, that began with a conflict about water. It began in Daraa, in the south of Syria, when a bunch of kids started spraying graffiti against the local governor and his mismanagement, his corruption.
Would you agree with that?
I agree that perhaps in some cases there is, there can be, but those are, in my view, are not the real deep-rooted causes.
Let's let James make his thesis. I'm sorry.
Well, that seems to be a fact, is that it began over the misallocation of scarce water resources. If you look at what's going on in Syria, the Fertile Crescent, right away across that region, Syria, northern Iraq, it used to be called the Fertile Crescent. There's been drying there. Whether it's related to climate change or not, it doesn't really matter. But there has been some drying. That's been going on since the early 1970s. There is research that shows essentially that the hotter it gets, the more people fight. When you get hot, you get cross and you fight. It's Swedish research. It's a very interesting kind of correlation between violence and temperature rising. For example, there are lots of things like that. And listen, whether climate change exists or not, what is indisputable is that populations are growing. So water, there isn't any more water than there was before. There are more people competing for a resource that is either static or diminishing. And that is going to cause conflict. In Yemen, 4,000 people are killed every year in water disputes locally. This was Yemeni government research before the present stuff that's going on. And furthermore, Al-Qaeda are exploiting all of this brilliantly. They are brilliant. They know exactly how important water is. They know that, for example, in Mesopotamia, political power has always rested on your ability to control water resources.
Would this be why ISIS has been trying to control the dams? And
It would. That ISIS are headquartered at Raqqa, as we all know. The reason they're at Raqqa is it's 10 miles down the road from the largest reservoir in Syria, Lake Assad. It's not a mistake. It's not coincidence that they're there. That's why they're there. Water equals political power. Every single major set-piece battle that Daesh, ISIS, whatever, have fought in the last 2 years has been for control of the dams over the Tigris and the Euphrates, at Mosul, at Fallujah, on and on. That's every single set piece, because they know without control of the water, they cannot have control of the people. They're trying to create a state. There is no state in that part of the world without control of water.
So, James, just stick there, because I'd like to bring in Tony here, because I'm sure these are fantastically good points, aren't they?
I happily agree that there's a lower level of social organisation than the state. Farmers kill each other, villagers fight each other and
so
kill
your
each
argument
other.
is really the semantic one about the word war and the word conflict and the word...
And conflict is there all the way through. At the level of the state, states don't go to war over water. And that would be really serious if they did. It's also quite serious that farmers kill each other over water. But it doesn't mean that the Syrian case is one of water. And the subtlety is to recognize that, because I was worried when this war in Syria was going on, I wondered whether it would prove whether that Al-Qaeda would fail because it couldn't organize the food, not the water, the food. The food's much more important than the water. The water that we need is quite small. We can go dirty for a long time, but we can't go without food for a long time. And organizing that food trade is somehow going on. When I raised this with colleagues who know about the region, they said, oh, it's all smuggled anyway. So there are systems of organizing the food where 90% of the water is embedded, which Al-Qaeda is much better at doing than we thought.
But do you agree with the basic premise that water is at the root of conflict, which goes up to and not necessarily including war?
No. Syria is in the fix it is because it's been messed around by people that have run it for some time, and it's a post-imperial madness. The whole of the Arab Middle East is a post-imperial madness, which we are, if you're English and British, we are responsible for to some extent. So that instability which is there, with the incapacity to bring in governments in Libya or Syria that would work, is the problem. It isn't the water.
Roger, can you draw out any sort of bigger points about this, like Tony, or do you want to come back on these points?
Well, in all cases, I want to say history is the important thing. Is that, the whole problem with journalism is you look at the last 2 years and you invoke crises, but the fact is that when you look at whether it's the history of waves of fundamentalism, it's the waves of profits and people like that, or whether it's actually the history of water shortages or so on, I mean, they just tell you a different story. You have to take a long-term perspective.
Can you not accept that things like climate change or population growth is not adding enormously to stress in Middle East, in Ecuador, in all kinds of different countries? That this is not just made up by journalists like me or by James. This is. I remember we went to see the Minister of Water in Bolivia. He said there were in one province there were 5,000 conflicts going on about water. 5,000. So this is small scale. This is small scale stuff. But do you not accept the premise that history is making itself even now, and that you cannot just go back and say, well, because there wasn't, therefore there cannot ever be, that therefore that what is emerging now is a different paradigm, is a different one where water or land or whatever is now under such stress that you will inevitably get conflict.
Well, look, as my PowerPoint says, I wholly in agreement that demographic growth is what it's all about. I mean, demographic growth.
Demography is
West Africa is absolutely spectacular, probably more than any other part of the world. And there's no reason to think it's going to stop. The World Bank has projected that's the only continent where it's going to go and go and go. And so water is just one subcomponent compared with land, compared with biodiversity degradation and all these things. I mean, but the core is demographic growth. The core is not water in itself. It's demographic growth, putting pressure on everybody. I mean, yes, there are water conflicts where there's water, but there are endless. I mean, you could multiply that figure with land conflicts. Northern Nigeria is full of land conflicts. People fight each other over land all the time. So demographic growth, yes, is at the root of it, and our policy failure to think about it because there's some sort of taboo. You remember in the 60s and 70s, people were panicking about demographic growth and thinking the world's about to go to rat shit. But now, have as many kids as you want to. It's fine. I mean, it's taboo. Nobody wants to talk about it. But how?
Well, there I would agree with you. Because you want to.
Well, I was just thinking because I met a lot of migrants in Yemen, and now I'm meeting the same ones in Malmö, in Sweden, where I live, where most of the Syrian refugees are arriving today. And I've talked to a lot of them, both in Malmö and in Yemen, and very seldom do they bring up the issue of water as a reason for. I have to say, I was quite surprised that this actually was the topic today. Because there are other things which are more important. They have no future. That's why they leave.
I don't think anyone's disagreeing that there are vast and
so
other
I've
forces
never
at work.
heard the issue of water being as big as this. Obviously, it's a problem, but it's if you have no future.
But can you not accept that there are underlying forces which express themselves in different sorts of conflict?
Imagine then, like me, if you've traveled through most of the deserts in the Middle East and you meet villages and people every day where water is an issue, especially if agriculture is such a 50% of Yemen.
Sure, more.
And they still do not bring up the issue of water as the most important one. I ask them, why are you leaving?
So what about in Somaliland right now, where there hasn't been rain for 3 years, where an El Nino rather than a climate change episode is so what is happening to the tens of thousands of pastoralists and others who cannot survive? I mean, are they quite happy with the fact they have no water, or are they moving?
No,
are they going into
Somalia? I know nothing about that part of the world of personal experience. But of course, it's an issue if you don't have it. But it's not the first thing they bring up when I talk to them.
But they are moving. I mean, that's the point. I mean, Somalia is a nomadic society, and if the place dries up, you move to where the water is.
Exactly.
And they're coming here.
No.
Sahel is drying up.
Are they actually coming here, or are they just
yes.
moving within their own nations?
But
well, they're doing that too, but they're coming north.
Who are moving then? you know, like most of the refugees arriving from Malmö, they are well-off, educated Syrians.
Yes.
It's not like you meet.
No, Syria is a distraction. Syria
It's
is a
not
different
like you
thing.
meet the
Syria is
villages from
No.
Al-Mahara who's walking into Malmö for a new life.
But I'm not trying to say that water is the only reason that people move. It's one of the many reasons. Of course, it's very much more complex.
It's a debate.
My God. And the ODI, the Overseas Development Institute, have got this very interesting model called the billiard ball model. Do you know about that? The cue ball is climate change, and then you have all these Millennium Goals as the pack. Right in the middle of the pack is water and energy, because that is the issue that knocks on to education and to health and to all the other things that the Millennium Goals are trying to do. Water is the central thing. It's the one that, if you're trying to tackle one of the many problems in the third world, as it used to be called, water is, I suspect, the one you want to go for because it impacts the most on the other issues.
Excellent. Okay, there's a point here, please.
Hi, Rosalind Bain. I make films, but in particular my background over quite a long time has been Latin America.
Speak up,
my
yeah.
background has been to do with Latin America. Just a couple of points, really, rather than questions. Often you get uprisings due to natural disasters, but it isn't the natural disaster that causes the uprising. So, for example, Nicaragua in 1979, it's the political response to the natural disaster. And that seems to me really what it is. It certainly was for the Sandinistas. And I spent time in Bolivia during what was always called the water wars, but actually was conflict. And that was a very simple cause. It was to do with privatization. And it was to do with people having to pay for water which they previously got free, having to buy it off lorries that were owned by private companies, and having always had a well, suddenly having to pay to have that well. So it was the ownership of water that was the root cause of the problem. Perhaps something else to put in.
Yeah, very good. Cochabamba, Madame. Anyone else want to make a point? One here, please.
Yeah, speaking about the ownership, and you mentioned before nobody really goes to war about water itself because they are transboundary agreements. But for example, stresses on water in Syria were formed by what Turkey was doing in terms of water mismanagement and the damming problems. And people directly, you ask them if the problem is water, they're not going to say that. But they will if you sit down with the farmers. Well, our crops aren't grown, you can't do that, it's a dry, etc. And in terms of the majority of people migrating, we can't just look at Syria. I have worked with the Kurds and in that region just as a boring, irrelevant scientist sitting there for about 2 years, and in Yemen. And they won't mention water is the problem on the ground, but they were saying we're starving. You know, the droughts came, well, this didn't happen. Well, foods, our crop things. So I don't think you can disaggregate food security from water security.
No,
According to farmers, they're linked.
Tony,
By the way, I work for UNFA.
But have you ever been thirsty? Do you know what it is like being thirsty?
Yeah, I was born and brought up in Libya. So,
In Libya.
I'm quite au fait with that reason and water wars, etc. So, but there are transboundary agreements, so it won't officially be saying this is a water war. And as the lady said there, yes, war is about water stress, waste, mismanagement, all aspects of it. And in terms of the demographic issue, it's surely mismanagement of natural resources. At the moment, we've got elections in Myanmar. Myanmar has been in bed with the Chinese for such a long time. Why? The Chinese have actually mapped out the energy resources that they can get from the natural resources from the rivers. And where does the energy go? It goes across the border. They have, what are the ethnic groups fighting about? One of the key things they're saying, well, we don't miss water, we're thirsty and all that kind of thing. They talk about their natural resources, though, as being
And all the way down the Mekong, they're planning 110 dams, which are
on the ground level said, this is the
exactly.
conflict. But it does contribute to argument, disagreement, escalates to conflict, and then where we call it war, I don't know, understand the semantics, but the people on the ground, water is key, and energy also a side-by-side issue. Yeah.
Tony, I'm going to ask you to come in here because you are the...
Well, it's a lot to do with poverty. I think I've also spent quite a long time in Yemen, and as I say, it's the worst predicament in the world in Yemen. The problem is that Yemen's poor. It isn't well governed, and it's poor. Therefore, it can't do the things that. I mean, do you realise the 17 million people that live in the Thames Basin? Some of them in sunny Oxford, and some in central London. We've only got enough water for 2 million of those 17 million. Okay, can you get this? It depends on whether you're rich or poor. You can't manage.
But how much is the poverty in Yemen?
No,
and places
the
caused
poverty
by
is
the droughts. And
yeah. Well, what comes first, poverty or drought?
Yeah.
In some, when people are poor, then they're certainly at that end of the activity, and then that they will be driven into further poverty. So the Somalia case is a good one where they're in a bad governance situation. If there's a drought, it's really as serious. Bad in California, which is probably also badly governed, you have a predicament which, because the agriculture is such a tiny part of the economy, and anyway, although they are exporting their water to us as well as to the rest of the United States, they're learning some lessons at this point in history, and they have the capacity to adapt and change.
No, good point. Okay, let's come at one in the middle here, back.
Just about California, because I went to the Schwarzenegger Institute, and obviously
the what?
the Schwarzenegger Institute in California, and they were talking about water
Army
shortage. Sorry? Yeah. And actually, just on the point about agriculture, it was actually the main actual use of the actual water was 80% from agriculture. Yes. So it was all about what their solutions were about actually making compromises amongst all the different parties. And it's all about, and they've managed to, obviously, again, it's been droughts, and I don't think they were disregarding the whole climate change. It's all about all different things considered. There's no single one thing, I believe. It's about there being lots of different solutions, and also all things to be considered in balance. So it's not just a third world issue, it's also an issue in the developing country as well. And that's to do with the points on growth. You look at California in terms of its growth, the tech industry has put a huge strain as well on population and also water use. So.
Okay, stop there. Anyone? Oh, here, right at the front.
James Thakra. I've been involved with Survival International since 1970 when we were putting the Indian reserves in with FUNAI and 9 other groups. The two gentlemen over there are of my age, more or less. We're of a certain age, and we're not thinking about the generations ahead. And I think the people that confront these guys, I mean, we can argue forever about whether water is a factor among many or not. That's not really the issue. I mean, tell Omar Sharif that when somebody's taking water out of his well, he shot him. You know, and that's quite a long time ago. There's a company outside Boston called Ionic that has developed membrane desalinization. I gather that in the Gulf, desalinization is done by Army water barges. They're looking ahead, and they're seeing this a problem. And I wonder how the economics of all that's going to work out. I mean, you're an expert on this. What is water desalinization as a factor economically in terms of who controls it, who has the equipment, and who distributes the equipment? Certainly the Israelis and Palestinians have a lot of problem about water. I'm going down to Ecuador, where the rivers have been poisoned by Chevron. Nigeria has been destroyed by Shell. These are serious issues, and for the future, this is escalating. All the things you have mentioned here are escalating problems. They're not just stuck now in our generation. They're going to be there for the future, and all the problems are dynamic. So how is water desalinization going to work? San Diego is now considering doing it. The New York Times today has an article about how bottled water in the Tibet Plateau is going to be depriving the Indians of their water supply, and they're going to quadruple it or quintuple the water so bottling there in the Tibet Plateau. These are transformational problems. They're not going to go away. They're going to get worse.
Tony, you have to come back here.
Desalination is a solution for rich countries. It is going to be a solution for Gaza too, if we can help them fund it. It's a tiny amount of water, but it's enough. The Gulf countries especially depend on desalination because they have urban populations which are beyond the capacity of the local aquifers to supply, so they have to desalinate. Riyadh, stupidly, is at 500 meters high and they pump it 1,000 kilometers to, because they have decided to take that direction. So desalination has moved from being $5 about 20 years ago per cubic meter to being just 56 cents now. And you don't know how much you pay for your water because you're British and you don't take an interest in this, but we pay about $2 to get it and about $2 to get it treated. So a 56-cent delivered water at the end of the pipe of the desal plant is very affordable water. So yes, desal will help a lot in places. It helps a lot in the 8%, but it doesn't help with the big water. So what I'd like this evening, but I'm not going to have the chance because we need 2 more sessions, to say that the water we really should worry about is the water in food, because we're determined to have cheap food, and I am thinking beyond. I'm not part of some short-sighted group of people. No, we need to understand we can't have cheap food, because if you have cheap food where 92% of our water is, we're not helping getting the farmers to steward the water properly. The farmers manage 90% of the 92%. That's where we really need to get ourselves focused. We need to be prepared to pay more for our food so that they can be either it can be in the price, which is very unlikely, or it's in some way given to them so that they can look after it for us. Because we're not clever enough to realize that the way we consume food, throwing 30% away and getting obese and so on, is the big problem globally.
James, can I ask James to come in? Because one of the problems in Yemen, as I understand it, I bow to everyone else, is that most of the water, 40% of the water, goes to produce one particular crop, which is called khat, which is you chew it basically. I mean, surely this is a distributive problem. It's not necessarily a water scarcity problem. It's just because they choose to grow khat rather than to drink the water. It's, so they prefer their virtual water rather than their real water.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's an economic problem, isn't it? I mean, they grow khat because it is the most valuable crop. It's more valuable than any foodstuff. Although that was never the intention. When the government subsidised fuel to drill for water, they thought the farmers were going to grow food to feed their growing population, but instead they grew khat, which of course is an appetite suppressant. But it has no nutritional value whatsoever in a country of 25 million where about half the country is in need of humanitarian assistance. So it's a complete perfect storm of economics, environment, stupidity, greed. I mean, it's everything happens in Yemen. But Yemen is, as we've said, a very extreme case, and particularly.
And here's a man who's just written a book about it called "The Most Dangerous Place in the World." So if you want to,
that's Somalia.
Any other? Oh,
that was Somalia.
Oh, sorry, the second most dangerous place.
Second.
Question here.
I just wanted to kind of touch upon.
Speak up. Speak up.
I just wanted to kind of touch upon the point of water security and then leading to food. Obviously, food security has been brought up a bit, and the role of kind of agro-businesses within kind of Africa, and obviously that having an impact on kind of farmers becoming reliant on products and stuff like that to grow food in areas where there is no water and things like that, and whether you feel what impact that's going to have within the future.
Anyone want to comment on that?
Well, the growth of international agribusiness in Africa is a total disaster. I mean, the Chinese in particular, but a number of other countries are marking out huge terrains.
Chinese arms.
They are in Sudan. I mean, I've seen this myself. They're trying to buy up land in countries I've been in. So
India buying up Ethiopia?
Well, anyway, we can discuss who's doing it, but it's happening. It's be a disaster because they'll be surrounded by small farmers who will get more and more and more aggrieved, and there'll be civil conflict as a result. It seems obvious, you know. I mean, government is completely stupid as far as I can see.
But the businesses are not being stupid because they are choosing specifically the places by the rivers where the water is. I mean, that is so they are using more and more.
In the short term, of course, it's good for them, no doubt about it. In the long term, it will cause massive civil discord for sure, because the small farmers around the fences of it. And I've seen, you know, large cattle ranches in Nigeria overturned by, aggrieved livestock producers because suddenly their pasture, which they previously had, has been cut off. So they tear down the fences and so on, and it'll happen on a much larger scale with the agribusinesses.
But Tony, they're growing stuff for the commodity market. I'm sure this is a good thing, isn't it?
We need perhaps to settle this China case. There is a very good lecture on Friday by Deborah Brattingham, who's a specialist on land grabbing and water grabbing in Africa. And what she's pointed out is, and what I have observed as well, but second-hand, is that the Chinese are very clever people. What they're investing in is infrastructure, roads and ports. So they're not investing in land and water. if they're buying up a little bit, but compared with the other buyers, but that spike of nonsense in the media about land and water grabbing in Africa was just a bubble.
Well, I'm glad that we disagree on that one because no, I mean, I agree with you completely.
There are places, I mean, Qatar and Jordan and a whole lot of other organizations are employing European consultants to do surveys of places where the water's already over-allocated, and certainly in Sudan it is the case.
But the absolute reality in large parts of Ethiopia and elsewhere is the water grabbing, which is going on. I mean, and you can see it in India, and you can see it elsewhere. I mean, are you saying that it's not important?
Yes, but it's much less in terms of scale than people have been writing about.
So how would you write it?
Well, we have produced a book on water and land grabbing, yes, which we produced 3 years ago, yes.
I could feel another column going on. Any other points? Okay, one here, please.
Continuing on that vein.
Speak up.
Continuing on that, how much do you think GMOs and the future of science in that respect can make a difference in both food and water allocation in developing nations?
James, drought-resistant crops.
Well, I think a huge difference, and I mean, I'm glad you asked that because it seems to me that our policy priorities are wrong at the moment. We keep trying to fix failing states effectively by bombing them, and actually, I mean, there is, I'm not anti that necessarily. There is a role for a military component to how we respond to Daesh or whatever. Of course there is, but that's where our focus is, when I think it should be much more on soft power solutions like science and technology, and I do think, I mean, whatever anyone else thinks here, that I think that water would be a very, very good place to start if you could help desperately poor countries like Yemen, like Somalia, like Afghanistan to better manage their diminishing water resources. You will, in the long run, reduce the risk of conflict and or war in those countries. And, of course, migration, which is the problem that we're all worried about at the moment. So, I mean, yes, I think it's fundamental. I think we are so confused about it. If you look at what's going on in Afghanistan, just one small example, the Kajaki Dam, do you know the famous Kajaki Dam? There's been a movie about it, which the Americans built in southern Afghanistan in the 1950s. They returned in 2003 to bomb it. 5 years later on, they sent NATO back to repair it again. I mean, what is going on? We have absolutely no consistency about the role of water in all of this, and we need to find one pretty quick, because actually, the cost of all of this is failing states driving unbelievable amounts of migration, and the migration thing is just starting. I mean, I do believe that the South is moving north as it dries up in a nomadic way. They are coming to where the water is, and that's where we live.
Michael, would you? I'll just coming
to where the money is.
Where the money is, where
the money is, where the water is.
Does water equal money? I mean, Michael, what do you? How much do you pay for your water when you go to Patagonia? Not much, I should think.
Well, it's interesting you bring it up, actually, and I was thinking once again about the poverty thing here, because the water that you actually do get in where people are in the deserts now do not come from a water hole or a well. It's water they've bought from a big town, and obviously these people are paying horrendous prices for water, and the poorer you are, the more you pay. And surprisingly, I've lived in Moss Side, Manchester for a year, and same thing there. So they pay more for water, gas and electricity than you guys do.
They're paying more for water because they're buying their Perrier water every night, or what is it?
I would say it's other things who are involved there, but
no, I'm genuinely interested. Actually, I don't know this phenomenon at all. But how are they paying more for their water?
More expensive.
Really? Oh, okay. Well, okay, right. There's one here, please.
Hi. Yes. Change tack a bit. There are migrants. I guess you could call them water migrants from global phenomena like climate change. For example, Kiribati is well known for salinization of their water table because of the rising in sea levels, and projections show that there will be more and more migrants like that. I mean, I wonder what the panel in general think in terms of how the world copes with them in future.
Okay, we can't agree about the past, we can't agree about the present, but what about the future? Is there any sort of consensus that it's going to get better? Or, I mean, do you see any sort of resolution of these problems? I mean, is there any...
If we get the politics right, it will get better.
Right. Ooh, okay. Is there any chance of getting the politics right? The politics of water, you know more than anybody else in the world, the politics of water is so horrendously complex that they cannot be resolved, can they? I mean, the Middle East is just this boiling house of water-restricted politics.
Well, the people are coming to, they want a decent life, they want dignity, they want a whole lot of other things. Water happens to be integral to everyone in this country. We don't even think about it. We just get a bit worried if the tap stops for some reason. And other people would like to be in that position.
But look ahead 10, 20, 30 years. Can you see, forget whether climate change is happening, just to stick to the population issues or whatever.
So is there going to be enough water to grow our food?
Yeah, exactly.
There is certainly enough water to give us this stuff and the stuff in the shower and for our jobs. There's certainly enough for that. When we're short, we can desalinate, and we'll certainly have enough. All you need is money. You need some clever technical people to put the technology. So the third thing is the technology, the taps and so on. And then you need governance. So we've experimented a million times. We know that that's what you need to solve the 8% problem. We're not sure about the 92%, which is where I therefore don't concentrate on the 8%, I concentrate on the 92%. And until the demography or the demographics came out from the UN agency that does them, they came out publicly in June, but they've been talking about them for about 6 years. And whereas I had the feeling that since 1994 was the point when we had numbers, it was an 8% and then we'd level off. 8 billion, then we'd level off, or 10 or 12 would be the high in the second half of this century. So, and since the demographers had always got it wrong before, and therefore I said, well, it'll probably be between 8 and 9. But they've come out very firmly, and I don't respect demographers because they always get it wrong, but they've come out very firmly saying that the African population is going to be 4.3 billion by the end of the century, and that's going to be more than Asia. So my thinking has always been, well, thank goodness we've got Africa. Its yields are 1 ton a hectare, whereas other places in the world, including UK, get 8 or 9 tons a hectare. They can often get 2 crops a year. So Africa's got a lot of potential. It's going to be able to feed itself easily. So that's good. And meanwhile, I've also been in Brazil and South America recently, and my mind blew, because in one small basin, the upper basin of the Xingu, which is one of the basins that has a tributary going up to the Amazon, which isn't used at all, by the way. The 8,000 cubic kilometers of water in the Amazon, we don't consume at all. We could consume the water in these upper parts, but there are 2 sorts of water. There's blue water, which you can see and pump and drink and so on, and then there's the water which is in the soil, which is sometimes called effective rainfall, but we can call that green water, and the blue water is the stuff that you can pump around. And in that upper Xingu basin, which we have someone who cares about the forests and things there, there's more green water, twice as much green water as in every economy in the Middle East, both it's blue and green.
But sure, it's a matter of distribution. So
but we've been solving this problem for 5,000 years. When a city didn't have enough water or enough food, it just brought it in. Right. So we've been doing it for a long time.
Tremendous. Roger, I mean, northern Nigeria, there's not much hope if you've got to get it from, I don't know, from northern Brazil or something.
Well, I don't want to just focus on northern Nigeria. I want to say my feeling is, yes, all these demographic growth projections about Africa are dead right. What we have seen in Africa is a total failure to innovate agriculturally. I mean, farmers in northern Nigeria farm the same way they did 100 years ago, effectively, partly because of course, weak governance, and partly because the climatic uncertainty is not a stupid response to it. However, if there are 4.3 billion people on the continent of Africa, you can see there's going to be massive continuing conflict, whether about water or land or anything else. It's just going to be a ferment of constant civil disorder and insecurity, and there's no evidence at all that the sort of politics you would need to resolve that is in any way in place.
James, I suspect you're going to find agreement here.
Yeah, well, I do agree with that. I mean, it is an issue of governance, especially in Boko Haram, northern Nigeria. If the government of Nigeria was looking after its people better, there wouldn't be an issue. And there's clearly a vacuum of proper governance. And into that vacuum, this is the danger for us, is that Al-Qaeda particularly are piling in. It's one of my favourite facts is that Sharia law, one of the many translations of the root of Sharia, it means the path to the waterhole, believe it or not, and that is what Al-Qaeda are trying to do. They are trying to bring Sharia to people, making a metaphor into a reality. And they're not just talking about it. They have units of engineers going around sinking wells for people and providing plumbing and guttering and the infrastructure to move water around. Because they know, and there are captured documents that show you that Al-Qaeda, that they've got a strategy here. And it's coming, it's international. This is ACAP document being sent to Akim in northern Africa saying, look after the interests of people's water. That's how you win their hearts and minds. That's how you get them on our side.
So is not WaterAid doing the same?
Well, I think we're miles behind. This is the problem. We are just not. I mean, yes, they are, but they're not nearly as effective as Al-Qaeda do. Because they bring to it all of the ideological baggage of the Quran. It's the way to the waterhole. So we have a real problem here because if these franchises start to link up, and there is lots of evidence that they are, then we have a properly international Islamist water-providing movement, which is going to be something very hard to beat.
Wow. Okay, Michael, are you going to be able to travel around in 20, 30 years, or are you going to be restricted to Northern Europe? Sweden?
That's a good question. I hope so. We will find ways to continue. There's always a way to get around things. So I think that we will continue.
We will continue. I'm going to have to draw this slightly to conclusion because I've got to head up to my own waterhole, which is in Wales. But you're very welcome to keep talking. And I mean, you're great, really great audience. And let's continue it at the bar. Let's continue it at the thing. And let's thank Tony and James and Michael and Roger because they've been brilliant. None of us agree with anybody, which is always a sign of a good talk. And, thank you very much indeed.